the night of my first encounter. It was a summer night, Pennsylvania. It was warm, after dark. So I'd been up at a friend's house. He had an Atari. We were playing video games. And I had one of those Star Wars blasters that the stormtroopers had. Took C batteries in the front of it. You know, it had a little cylinder that spun and it made this like noises, like something like that. Anyways, I was walking home. It was after dark, and I don't know which came first, to be honest, at this stage, if it was the feeling like there was something wrong or the smell, because I remember catching a smell, and it was like a wall, and it was like wet dog, sulfury, rot. Definitely, and I had smelled skunks before. I'd smelled, you know, we had a lot of deer, so a lot of roadkill deer, a lot of roadkill raccoons and possums. This was something, another level of smell that unlike anything I'd ever smelled before. Then the heckles, and it was silent. I just remember it being like really quiet. Something in me triggered with that smell, with that fear. After how long, I don't know, maybe probably 5-10 seconds, felt like 30 or more. I pulled the trigger on this toy gun and it went, and in the silence, something to my right sounded like at that time in my brain, I thought it was a truck just falling down that hill and busting tree branches and boom, boom, boom. And I was frozen for a moment. And then I remember walking forward to look down because it was summer, so the stars were out. There must have been some amount of moonlight. I don't remember seeing the moon, but I remember looking down and being able to see the creek, light on the creek, and I saw this thing step out. And I couldn't make out a face. It was a silhouette, but it was the biggest human-like thing I'd ever seen. I could tell that it was hairy. I could tell that it wasn't a bear. The shoulders, I mean, it had like no neck. It was just a little bit of a head and these broad shoulders, and it walked. And it took a step, and then I heard it going up the other bank. By the second or third noise of either a foot or a hand going in, the next day I would see, you know, some like gouge marks and puncture marks in this hillside, because it was a very steep ravine. I heard maybe 2 of those, and I was gone. I was running top speed back to my house, and I felt like I was running off the tips of my big toes. I mean, I just remember running and then staring out the window the rest of that night, peeking through the curtains in my room, watching with that light, the wood line across that creek for anything. I just felt like whatever it was might come down there. And the next day I would go out there with the dairy farmer that had the farm in between where it happened and our property, and have him walk with me to show him what I'd found. In that moment, you know, he says, "Don't worry about this." We found footprints. We found toe prints on one side of the bank, heel print on the other, and then these gouge marks. And on the side that I heard all the crashing on, there were a bunch of, some trees completely busted down, others it was just branches. It sounded like there shouldn't be a tree there, but there were trees there, but most of it was broken branches, but there were a couple of smaller trees that were just completely knocked over. So he witnessed this with me, and he made me promise. He said, "I'll take care of this, but you gotta promise me you'll never talk about this to anybody." He says, "Can you promise me that?" I said, "Yeah, you know, sure." And I didn't. I never told anybody.
Carlos Jimenez is an anthropologist and Bigfoot researcher who currently lives in the Pacific Northwest. An encounter with a Bigfoot creature in his childhood caused him to realize that Sasquatch do in fact exist. However, he remained silent on the topic until he was an adult. Many hundreds of people with similar encounters decide to remain tight-lipped on their own run-ins with North America's bipedal ape, either out of fear or the anxiety of being ridiculed by their friends and family. Anyone who has had an encounter of their own knows that Bigfoot creatures quietly roam the mountains, forest, and countryside, occasionally receiving a startling glimpse by unsuspecting passers-by. Carlos is now open about his research for Sasquatch and has had run-ins all across the United States, including in Pennsylvania, New York, Washington, and Texas. He joins us with an exclusive look at his encounters with North America's wild man of the woods.
I was probably 18 before I started talking about Bigfoot. And I'd never heard or saw anything like that again. And nobody I knew growing up there had heard or seen of anything like this. There were, again, TV shows and stuff would come out, and I was like, I think that's what I saw. But, you know, all I did was have an interest in it. I didn't talk about my experience. I wouldn't say I was traumatized, but years went by. It wasn't until college when I was in California taking an anthropology class. I was pre-med at the time. I thought I was going to be a doctor. Then I took Dr. McKenna's class, Intro to Physical Anthropology, and he's talking about Gigantopithecus. He's talking about Bigfoot. And shortly thereafter, then I would read Dr. Krantz's book, Big Footprints. I would fly to Washington State, interview him and about his book at the time, and apply to grad school. Ended up switching as an undergrad into anthropology as a degree, finishing and doing a project on Bigfoot at the time. But I wasn't really doing anything with it after that first experience other than keeping it inside. Starting in college, then I started to pursue it kind of on a research level, books and whatnot. But then when I got to grad school and I got accepted to Washington State and became Dr. Krantz's TA, then I became very much more into the International Society of Cryptozoology, and Krantz was old and he would send me out to investigate things with a topo map. We didn't have GPS, you know, and there was no cell phones, so I had my kit, and while I was his student, I would have my second encounter in the Blues Mountains down in the Lewiston-Clarkston area, just outside of there. I'd had to stop and pull over because it was probably May, but it was a freak spring snowstorm. And so I was driving down one of these logging roads and I had to pull off because even though I was in a Honda, there was too much snow. So I set up camp and I was about 3.5 miles from where I was supposed to be heading to look at a place where somebody had allegedly shot one and it had twisted some trees down. So I was on my way to this location. I ended up camping, and about 3 in the morning, in the dead of a sleep, I sat up, you know. And again, the heckles on my neck were up. It was quiet out because it was a wet snow, real heavy wet snow. I unzipped the tent and I'm looking around and I don't hear anything. And again, it's that weird silence, but I didn't think of it as weird as the first time because now it's snowing. And if you've ever been in a heavy snow with heavy snow on the ground, the woods, everything kind of gets quiet. There wasn't much of a breeze. And at this point, 3 in the morning, like hours later, after I'd set up the camp, when the snow was coming down wet and heavy, it was now kind of petering out. There were breaks in the clouds. So again, there was enough skylight that looking out into this pine forest that wasn't real thick pine forest, there wasn't a lot of underbrush where I was, I could see pretty clearly, pretty far out. And I'm staring, something, again, I didn't hear anything specifically, but I'm looking into an area and I'm scanning, and that's when I see something doing like this. Like the tree looks like it's doing this, and then the longer I look, again, I can make out the silhouette of this large, looks like head and shoulders and hips, couldn't see feet, couldn't see hands, but something is moving back and forth like this, and it wasn't small. It was a height of a tree trunk. And so I was paying attention because where it was coming out, there was a branch. And so I could see that there was something coming above the branch that looked like it could be the head, but just below the branch, again, where this was this wide shoulder. So I knew it wasn't a bear because bears are slender. They don't have the wide shoulders because they're quadrupedal. They're not brachiators. They're not evolved to be swinging from the trees. They climb trees, but they don't swing branch to branch like we can if you've ever been on a jungle gym. So as I'm looking, this thing's doing it, and then suddenly I lose it, and I don't see it anymore. And I never heard anything, I never saw anything, didn't smell anything, but I keep looking, I'm trying to figure, what, that thing, how did it, I should have seen it, like, walk away, or, leave the area, and I didn't see it. And the next thing you know, I catch some motion at the base of the tree. And I believe now that it was in this position, doing the same thing, kind of peeking out from almost like looked to me like a push-up position or something. I don't know. Again, all I could see was a silhouette. I couldn't see anything more specific. And then eventually I stopped seeing that. And as I sat there and watched, light was slowly coming up, and I drifted off, and then I woke up because it was bright and it was gone. But I went out, there were footprints in the snow. I tracked them ways through this woods, then down a hill, and then there was a plum thicket, like a big thicket. And as I'm going through the field following this set of tracks, another set of tracks comes and joins it, that's smaller. And these were some pretty big tracks, around 15 inches. The other ones were a little smaller, but they joined at this thicket, and it looked like a tunnel entrance, like a game trail going in, but instead of a regular game trail, it almost looked circular. It was really interesting. Like I can't say that it was woven. I've seen things since then that look like what I remembered seeing, but I didn't pay enough attention to those details. I did see, though, that something had dropped down from its feet to all fours and crawled in there. It went in on hands and knees or hands and feet because it was very muddy and through there, and it went back and it branched. And that was the end of where I went by myself tracking it. Again, I was there for that purpose, but something happens when you're there in that purpose and it's just you. And getting down on all fours and going through a plum thicket at, even though, I was invincible at 20 something years old, I had enough fear and good sense, I hope. Maybe if I would have crawled back there, I would have gotten the evidence that we all want, but it just seemed like the cost benefit in that moment was greater than what I was willing to do, again, by myself as a young man.
It is not uncommon to hear encounters with Sasquatch from the Pacific Northwest. In fact, for many decades, people commonly thought they only existed in this region of North America. More recent reports of the creature, though, show them turning up all across the country in less commonly associated areas such as the northeastern United States, as Carlos recounts in a more recent run-in with multiple Bigfoot creatures in New York State.
So after that second encounter, I was sent to Africa to look for dinosaurs as a cryptozoologist working for Dr. Barry Hewlett. So we had gotten a grant through the National Institute of Health and the Swan Fund out of Oxford, England, to go, and I was looking for the Mokele Mbembe, which is these sauropod dinosaurs that were supposedly going around in the area where the pygmies live around Lake Tele in what used to be called the Congo. I don't know what its current name is, but we flew into Central African Republic and we made our way through the jungle across the border there. Got really sick, almost died, didn't see any dinosaurs. Came back, and that was kind of those early college years with that first Bigfoot encounter. I thought I was gonna be the next Indiana Jones, and almost dying. And then 18 months after I was back, I had like dysentery-like symptoms. And so I barely finished my master's degree. My life changed. I finished my degree and ended up becoming a teacher. 20 some years go by, and Bigfoot's something I talk about now, and I tell my stories, those first two encounters. But 2019, my partner Renee and I were driving from upstate New York back to my family's party in Meadville, Pennsylvania, when we pulled off the road just across the border in downstate New York, right at the border in the Allegheny Mountains, which is part of the Iroquois Nation. We were on res land right by the Allegheny River, and we had an encounter. That encounter then in 2019, I heard them for the first time, didn't smell them again, but heard multiple individuals. I heard the samurai chatter, I heard whooping, I heard them mimic, then trying to change the whooping into a woofing. And my partner Renee said that what it sounded like to her was a barking seal. Like that's how she would describe the sound that this thing, one of them, was making. So that encounter then led me to kind of wrap up teaching in Santa Monica and Los Angeles and want to move here to the Pacific Northwest. And I just felt like the universe was pushing me in that direction. That was now 3 times. I mean, how many people have one encounter? And now this is the third one. Now this one wasn't a nighttime one, it wasn't a visual one, but this was the first time I heard them. And it shook me. What has happened since we moved up here? Here is Crescent City, California. So we're in Del Norte County. It's the northwesternmost county in California. Coastal and mountains as you go inland. And it's right on the border of Oregon. Survivor Man, Les Stroud, is less than 2 hours from here. Expedition Bigfoot did a season here 2 years ago maybe. But it was really interesting because a lot of the stuff that they filmed during that season is what we filmed for the documentary that we ended up shooting here, which we shot because I have had things happen since I've been here.
The Redwoods region of Northern California has been the focus of many Bigfoot investigations over the last few decades. In fact, the famous Patterson-Gimlin film was recorded less than an hour from Redwoods National Forest near Willow Creek, California. The famous explorations of John Green and Rene DeHinden in search of Sasquatch were also part of this infamous region. Today, Carlos resides just outside Redwood National Park in hopes of solving the ever-present mystery of North America's undiscovered primate.
I've had a daytime sighting on French Hill Road where I pulled in and I saw something step into the brush, and I immediately jumped out of my car, got the camera ready, sat for 45 minutes and got absolutely nothing. Not a sound, not a smell, nothing. Not even the usual like dome of silence kind of thing that happens. I saw it step in and it was gone. I can't explain what happened with that, but that was 10 in the morning and the sun was shooting at it. So when I turned, it was to my right, the sun was on it. It looked like black doll hair. And I'd seen that once before in a daytime sighting in the desert Southwest. And what was it, a suit? It didn't look like, to me, to my eye, both times. The second time, the one that happened here, the thing was gone. It stepped in and was gone. I saw the thing I focused on. Is what happens when you have a visual thing, you end up focusing on something. And for me, I don't know why, but my eyes went to the calf and the heel. And I could see the hair, but I could see the tendon, the Achilles tendon of the thing as it lifted its heel up and stepped into the woods. As much as I saw that one, it seemed thinner, like maybe younger. It was only about 7.5 feet tall. And again, it was a quick sighting and I didn't catch the front of the face. It was like the middle of the body and the back of the body as it entered into the woods upright. But it was about 7.5 feet tall, and it looked like a basketball player, like the build of an NBA player, like that kind of tone, but muscular, but also tall and large. And the other two that I mentioned earlier, they were larger. I would call them more, some people would say patty-like, but I would say kind of gorilla-like with the kind of the stumpy head, but real big, real broad, big front to back, big left to right. That daytime sighting was a big one. The one that really stands out to me, when Renee and I were in LA still, and we were looking at properties up here, we were actually at the time looking at moving to Idaho. We had a sportmobile that you could camp in and drive around. And we'd taken it to Boise and left it at a friend's house there while we were looking at homes there before we ended up deciding on here. So during COVID, I needed to get out. We were getting cooped up, living in an apartment in LA, and I just did a road trip up to pick it up and drive it to here. So from Idaho to Northern California was the goal. A friend of mine joined me from Oklahoma. I picked her up at the airport. So we ended up there, driving the van back. We got the van all the way down to Gasky on French Hill Road. The craziest thing, we pulled off the road on the 199 because she was flashing the lights. I was driving the van, she was driving my car. She was flashing the lights that she needed to use the bathroom. So I pulled over into this just dirt pullout, and I got out to go over into the woods, and she got out and was gonna go kind of by the car. But as I was walking over to the woods, I got this feeling. And it was, people describe it all the time, like a feeling of dread. And I got a feeling though, not just of dread, but like, I'm in danger. I gotta get back in the car. And so I signaled, hurry up, let's go. And I just went back into the van. She got back in and we continued on down the road to our destination. As we pulled in, I parked the van, she parked the car, and I was setting her up to sleep in the van. And then I had a tent that I was setting up in his yard, and he knew that we were gonna be coming in the middle of the night. He said, hey, just, be aware, I'm having some bear activity. This was in August. The wind was kind of coming from the east. It was a hot, dry wind. And I was setting up, because he told us about the bears, I was just setting up some of my game trail cameras on the van just to point out different directions in case the bear, came sniffing around and might get some cool, bear shots. Within 5 minutes of getting this kind of set up, it was around 4:20 something in the morning, a.m. It was still dark. I just got the sense of, look behind you. Like, I just had this feeling like, and I looked back, and all I had was my little iPhone, which had the little iPhone camera light on it. So I turned that camera light back, and 60 yards back in his driveway, it turns. So as you come in his driveway, it's just got like one little elbow in it. And at that elbow, there are these two round, what I thought might have been reflectors, because they were bright white. And that's a key. I've never seen anything but reflectors reflect bright white, but they were bigger than reflectors. And as I'm looking at them, they're not moving. I'm thinking, oh, maybe he's put a couple of reflectors on a tree out there so that, he knows that's where the turn is. But I'm thinking that's odd, because they were up pretty, even from where I was standing, they were up pretty high. I was looking up at a distance at some two round things. I go back and I'm finishing it up, and I look back again, They're still there. I go to get in the van and I'm like, one last time. I look back, they're gone. The reflectors aren't there anymore. And I say that now because they weren't reflectors. they were eyes, some kind of eyes. And as soon as I went in, I was like, I better, she's already worried about bear because she was living in Oklahoma. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna tell her about this. Hey, I got the camera set up and we're sitting there and we had like the little window pulled open. I said, do you need anything? And literally outside, I was talking to her like this, and right outside, less than 30 feet, the loudest pursed lip whoop I'd ever heard in my life. And she got nervous and started talking really fast. I was like, shh. And as I'm shushing her, and again, this is all happening very quickly, the whoop gets a response. And then the response was, again, very specific, but it was farther down, what I would say down French Hill Road now, like farther up the mountain, but not far, maybe a quarter of a mile. You hear this very, very loud, a two-tone whistle. And then somewhere off in the woods, probably a mile away, it sounded a lot farther, was something that when I've interviewed for podcasts and other things, it's hard for me to describe because I can't ascribe it to anything. It sounded metallic. It sounded like somebody, like when we were kids, when you talk into a fan, but then it also sounded primate. And it was like but it had a metallic resonance to it. It's, I almost like a vibration. Like when you talked into a fan, you would get that whoa, whoa, I am your father, Luke. It was like that, but more metallic. And that's the only thing I can say. It was like a vibrational voice. And she was freaked out. I was freaked out. She's like, no, don't. I was like, what? She goes, they'll hear us talking about them. I said, who? And then she shut up. And to this day, this individual, that's why I'm not going to name this individual. She doesn't want to be a part. She doesn't want her name attached to this, but she was there. So there was a corroborator. And the next morning, I would pace that out. I would find that branch. And when I measured it, where that branch was bouncing through the eyes was 12 feet in the air. And it's just, I'm glad whatever it was that had those eyes that I couldn't see it, because I don't know what I would have done. I mean, when I was tired, I'd driven all the way from Boise that day, 500, I think it was 500 miles. And so I was exhausted and ready for bed, but I know what I saw. She was there for the next 3 days. So in those next 3 days, she also heard them scream. We heard them, they were in the area when we came in. But that night, that was the last that we heard of them. We set the cameras up, of course, over the next several days. Didn't get a whole lot other than my buddy Kirk's turkeys and chickens and things coming in front of the camera, and bear. But we also had the screams over the next couple of days, real high-pitched, short screams. They would just cry out like, what was that? And again, there are cats, there are bobcats, there are mountain lions up there, but they don't have that volume. They don't have that volume, and they don't have that intensity of the volume. That night and the next couple of days was something else. I would bring the film back, and the camera that I'd hooked up to the back of the van that night had over 7,000 images. With the timestamps of when we heard the whoop and the whistle, and thereafter, there was something with the orangutan, kind of hairy, long, strangly hair that went across several times that showed up in a couple of the flashes. There were these weird, like bright white lightning flashes. And I mean, there's a spot in there where there's a rectangular object in the sky. And this is now after the sun's, like the sky is starting to turn pink in the images. And so it's like image, and then a rectangular object, and then regular image. So something was in a frame for one frame out of all those pictures that was in the air, that was rectangular. I don't know conclusively but it was enough weird stuff that went along with seeing the eyes, that went along with hearing the whoop and the whistle and the weird metallic gibberish, that I feel like in some way it was connected, but I can't prove, it might be conjecture, but certainly a coincidence that it all happened like timestamp wise and visually wise, like right with it. So that was the big one again. And then for the next couple of days hearing them, I slept in my tent and I left my iPhone recording audio as I slept. 99.9% of that's me snoring. Sadly, I've got sleep apnea, and that doesn't help in these situations, but I was hearing, and in some of that audio recording, I was able to capture something was throwing little things at my tent. I could hear things hitting it when I was in the periods where I wasn't snoring. And so again, those COVID times in the apartment in the hot LA summer, I had my headphones on. I was just listening, listening to those hours to try to hear where that happened. And there were times where I was hearing things getting thrown. And then I found these little pebbles, little acorns and stuff around my tent the next day. So, I mean, my goal ultimately is to add to the information that's out there, as other people, like hopefully some of you watching, are going to do. Like if you come across evidence, to try to collect it correctly and share it, so we can get as much information as we can to try to come up with some answers or find some patterns in what these things are.
The dense, hot swamplands of southeast Texas are not where one would expect to have an encounter with a Sasquatch. But that is exactly what happened when Carlos went to visit a friend one summer. Many people who've encountered Bigfoot creatures in the Big Thicket area describe them being more aggressive than the Wildmen of the Pacific Northwest. Wouldn't you be cranky if you live in a hot, humid environment and were covered head to toe in thick hair? Let's join Carlos as he describes his encounter with the Sasquatch of the South.
A friend of mine, former Army Ranger and educator, lived in Texas. And so I drove from LA, picked him up in Texas, and we both went out to East Texas. When I first started teaching, I was teaching with him in Houston. And so it was right after Hurricane Katrina. So we went back to that area. He was now living in the middle of the state, out north of Austin, in a little town called Burnett. We went out to the Big Thicket, and there was a military guy, former vet, who had opened up a camp for disabled vets so they could access and get into like deer blinds and do some hunting. And so we got a place there and stayed. It had electricity, it had fans, which if you've ever been into East Texas in the summertime, it was hot. So we went to this place, Turkey Creek Trail, got back there a ways and left the trail because I was finding, breaks at heights that suggested to me that it was possible there was something going on. And there was a big one off trail. So I wanted to go back and check it out. And again, there was something that was kind of drawing me to it. And as I went back there, I was wearing a GoPro, and I had my buddy wearing a GoPro, just because we wanted to document as much of whatever we were out looking for evidence of Bigfoot. Before I left the trail, we heard what sounded like two kind of birds talking to one another. And my buddy, who's not a hunter, again, he was a ranger, but I grew up hunting, he didn't grow up hunting. He's like, oh, it sounds like a couple turkeys. And I remember my response to him was, it sounds like something trying to sound like turkeys, but that doesn't sound like turkeys. And I don't know two turkeys that yell 100 yards away from each other to each other through the woods. I said, listen to that. And he listened, and we could hear them. Looking back, I think they were young ones, and they were like, and it was really loud. Again, I can't give you the volume, and I can't give you the vibration, but I could feel these two things talking to each other. And that's what led me to go, ooh, when the sound stopped is when I started to step off the trail, and it got quiet. It got that dome of silence that I'd experienced before my life hit. And I was on full alert, and I'm looking around, and I'm not hearing anything. And I'm like, oh crap. Those weren't turkeys. Those were what I thought they were, and something is near here. But not smelling anything, not seeing anything, feeling that sense of fear, I turned around and started to walk back because I'm thinking, oh, well, it must not be anything, because it got quiet. As I walk back, I'm about maybe less than 100 feet from getting back to the trail. These were sloughs, by the way, like these swampy areas. So I'm looking for snakes, I'm looking up, I'm looking down, and that's when the loudest sound that I've ever heard in a swamp hit. And it wasn't a yell or scream, it was the sound as though something had thrown a tree at me, but without the sound of something flying through the trees, like without the sound of a tree falling with a crack, 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 the accelerating. This was the sound of like if you had a tree trunk that you couldn't even get your arms around and maybe 6 to 8 feet long, just slammed at full speed into the ground. It was boom! And I caught on my GoPro, you can see my buddy's eyes get big. I was close enough where you could actually see his eyes look up. He's giving me signs like tree falling, and I get up to it and I'm like, I don't know that was a tree that fell. I don't know. I said, it sounded like a tree was thrown at me. I said, did you see anything? And he said, no, I didn't see anything. I said, I didn't either. I said, that's all I heard was the boom. But we were still in that silence. And the last thing I remember in that silence is our reaction to that wasn't, hey, what were we there for? We were there to try to find evidence. And neither of us goes back off trail to go to where we heard this boom and investigate. And I don't get it. I mean, we were both armed, both men, but some switch turned off in both of our heads. We didn't go running, which I would think, fight or flight, not to fight to go, but to investigate, and not to flee. We just ended up walking and continuing on the trail like we were still just hiking and looking for evidence, as though that wasn't a big deal. And I can't explain it. About an hour later, as we're getting back almost to the vehicle, is when I realized, what just happened? Why were we back at the car? Why didn't we go? I don't know. I don't either. Neither of us could explain why we didn't continue to investigate. And actually, hey, there we are. We just heard the turkey sounds, these things communicating, and now something slammed a tree. There was the dome. All the evidence was there to go and pursue, but I can't explain why. We just continued on, and we didn't really talk about it beyond a couple of seconds. It was though it was just another thing that happened that day. But then about an hour later, it struck me and him like, that was really weird. Like, why didn't we go and look for this thing? And neither of us were like terrified and wanting to run away. I mean, we were shocked in the moment, but once that wore off, the inquisitive part of we're both science people. He's got a physics degree, and I taught STEM for 20 years almost. That was my thing, and I couldn't bring myself to go. And I don't want to say I couldn't bring myself to go. It just didn't even register to let's go do that. It didn't come up. Nor did let's get back to the car. It was, all right, well, let's continue to look for evidence, as though that whole story was just like looking at the pitcher plants. It was really odd, and that's not the only time that's happened to me where I should have gone further. I told you this story from when I was younger in the Blues Mountains. I could have dropped down and gone in there. In that moment, I was by myself, and so I can at least logic out why I didn't continue. There was no immediate threat or danger, but it looked like there could be. It was that anticipatory thing. So I don't know, that was the Big Thicket though. And I want to go back because in addition to that, we heard some interesting things at night. I've heard of some places there that I want to go back to the thicket, to other parts of the thicket with people who know the area, who can take me to one of the hot spots. Because we were just picking a spot based on this place that we could stay that was kind of centrally located, and we could drive to some of these different trails and walk these trails like dusk and dawn, and try to see what we could find and do some fishing. I mean, again, it was COVID. We were just trying to get out at that time, but we did have that encounter, and the thicket is an area where I absolutely believe that these skunk apes exist, and I think that they extend down. I mean, there were enough reports that I read in the Houston area, on the eastern side of the Houston area, where people had seen these chimpanzees, going through their garbage cans, and then, nobody's lost a chimpanzee. They try to find the animal and they can't find it. There's something to those stories. I'm not here to say what that is, but as an anthropologist, I have to be open-minded and say, okay, well, these people witnessed something and they described something's going on there. And when you add that up and you follow that terrain up into the thicket, that whole area, and the thicket, if you're not familiar, goes all the way up to where Boggy Creek, and the Sulphur River bottom, and there's several rivers that run through the thicket. And I can't remember how many different ecosystems down there. There's at least 12 ecosystems in that thicket. So we certainly didn't explore, even a big enough piece of it for me to not want to go back someday. But I definitely don't love the heat and don't love the bugs. I like it up where I'm at now. It does get warm up here, but it's not as buggy.
Sound like a little machine gun. Yes, sir. I just heard something. Yeah, like, yes. 12 o'clock. And then you can mark the trees. Can you see high up in this? Let's go see how far it stretches. Ooh. It's an interesting depression here. Yeah, I am, but I'm looking here. See how wide it is at the toes? You can take a picture. I mean, that's probably just, could be anything. But it's interesting. If I find another one 6 or 8 feet in line with that, see that? It's tricky. It's going to quiet this way. Use this. It's red line. Out back scout boy. It's like shouldn't sound. Slides. When in frameworks, remember. What is that thing? You sound like a helicopter. There's something back here that it's telling me machine. It's like. On it. We'll just go till we get to like another little, like, open area or different temperature. There's something back here.
Carlos has had run-ins with the Wildman of the woods all across the country, and it is important here that we remember that currently in the United States, the #1 threat to wildlife, including Bigfoot, is the loss of wildlife habitat. Whether you live in the Pacific Northwest, the New England region, or the southern United States, over 6,000 acres of prime habitat are lost daily due to development, agriculture, and other human activities. We must do our part to protect these wild places so we can continue our quest in the search for Sasquatch.
In 2019, and then the things that happened since then, since we moved up here, I've been reinvigorated and reinterested in the whole Bigfoot subject. I want to try to find more answers, and it's become not just a passion pursuit, but almost an obsession. And so being up here, decided to do something. I wanted to create an online presence. I want to get back out there and find out who's doing what. I mean, I was completely out of the loop, 20, 30 years. Nobody knew who I was. I didn't even realize there was a Bigfoot community. There was no Bigfoot community when I had last had a sighting in the mid-90s. There were some people that, I knew that I would see at this conference in British Columbia, and that was it. Luckily, one of those people was Jeff Moldrum and some of the people that are still involved in the community, and now there's conventions and all these things I had no idea. I was completely out of it. So I started a web page, I started a social media presence, and I called it the Chronicles of Carlos, hoping to get people to share stories with me, to validate, again, those encounters that I'd been having, and to try to see what else people were seeing. And then that led to, through Renee, one of her childhood girlfriends, brothers, is Kirk Stewart, who lives here in above Gasky on French Hill Road, who'd been featured in David Polidi's book, Tribal Bigfoot, and I wanted to follow up. But then I thought, well, why don't I make a document? This might be my chance to do a bucket list item. Something's calling me to this. I wouldn't keep having these encounters, these experiences. I just believe everything happens for a reason. I do believe you manifest some things in life, but I think that some things is just the universe hitting you over the head until you finally get to it. So I got to it. So then I started to put it out in newspapers and advertise and try to find other people And it was hard. I didn't get a lot of response. It's funny now that the film's been wrapped, how many people have stories to share with me. So there'll probably be a chance to follow up with those people. But ended up with some other individuals that were in that original David Pleady's book, and at least one local person. And so we're calling this first volume, that's based primarily in this Del Norte County area, Bigfoot Buried My Gun. It was originally shot as a documentary, and now we've broken it up into a 3-part miniseries. For me, I love collaborating, and hopefully, the more people that I meet, we can, do some collaboratives in the future. So.
The Wild Wishes program grants wildlife encounters for children facing special challenges, ranging from traumatic loss of parent or siblings to critical illness, depression, and other challenging life issues. And yes, we even do Bigfoot expeditions for these kids. If you know of a kid that might qualify, go to kingdomzoo.com or email me at chester@chestermore.com.